Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I'm continuing with more of your questions in another Ask Judy. This question is from Elizabeth Beckman, 1947, and she said, this is about cars. I don't know a ton about the vehicles, but I'm going to do my best. So, Will Geer not driving, would transportation be part of a performer's contract, or would the actor simply request car service when needed? I think it kind of depended. I know in the first season, because Richard Thomas didn't drive, he was from New York, had never learned to drive, didn't have a license, they did pick him up and take him home. And I expect that was part of his contract. And then once he got a license and had learned to drive, then he drove himself. With Will Geer, since he never drove, I don't know if he had a car service early on, whether he was responsible for getting himself there, but I know that his son Tad then became his stand-in and his driver at a certain point. So he always had to have somebody drive him. So I'm not sure. When you are on location, like far enough away, at a certain distance, they have to provide transportation for everybody, cast and crew, to go to location. And typically, if you are, like if I am going to another state and filming on location, then on locations, they do provide transportation unless you happen to have chosen to rent a vehicle. So that is part of typically the contract. But locally, yeah, and sometimes with local locations that were pretty close to the studio, our call would be to location. So I think there might be, with a location, mileage thing relative to how far they could expect you to take yourself to location. Then you said, of course, children don't drive. Guardians or studio drivers would then be responsible for child actors, accompanied by guardians being on set on time. For children, yes, our parent or guardian was responsible for driving us. So never any studio drivers or anything like that for the children. Because obviously our parent or guardian had to be over the age of 18. We also had to make sure that we had somebody who could drive. Continuing about vehicles, asked, there have been many scenes where the characters, including yourself, actually drove the vehicles instead of always using a process shot. My question is, were the vehicles authentic to the period or altered to make them easier to operate? They were authentic to the period. They had to find vehicles that were, the truck was always breaking down. So that's why a lot of times they were having to pull it literally. Several big guys they'd attach a rope to the bumper and they would pull it into the shot and they'd pull it out of the shot. And that did happen. Leslie Winston, who played Cindy, Ben's wife, talked about with her red car, she never was able to master driving it. And so they always had to pull it into scenes or out of scenes because she couldn't drive it. So they were hard to drive. I remember that van that Mary Ellen and Kurt had. The steering, no power steering. So driving those vehicles was very difficult. I learned to drive on a manual, a stick shift, so that aspect, if a car had that, wasn't so much of an issue for me. David Harper said he always struggled with that vehicle that Jim Bob had built and was always having trouble with it and running into things. I didn't have to drive a lot of different vehicles. I think I drove John Boy's car, which was, I don't think, that difficult, and the van. I don't think I ever drove the truck, but yeah, they were authentic and they were not made any easier to drive. So yeah, that was always a challenge. Then mentioned that Will never actually drove and they would pull the truck with a rope. Yes, that was true with various different people. So we all just had to deal with that challenge. I have a couple of questions about sound and music. This is Josian Hunique, 7277. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And this was in, I believe, the episode The Baptism, when you said "Stand Up for Jesus" sounded too good. How was that done? Pre-recorded? It was a mix of different things. Sometimes we sang things live, but most of the time with things like that, they were pre-recorded, but they were pre-recorded sort of at the time. They didn't take us away in advance. They just taught us a song in the morning. Someone would come and, and they'd play the song over and over and over again. And then we would just sing along. And then if there was some dialogue happening, then we would just, mime it. And same thing like with dances or party things and stuff like that, where there was a band playing, was that if there was actual dialogue, then they just mimed and the music wasn't there. So they'd start it so you could get the rhythm of it, and then they'd make it quiet, and then you would just keep, dancing to that rhythm, and the dialogue would happen. And so those types of things. So we did pre-record, and, I maybe it was just that particular day we got a better batch of extras who could sing. And there were some good singers in the cast and the stand-ins and and I think sometimes even the crew sang along when we were pre-recording. So it was pretty much done like that. Here is a mix of sound and other question here from Kevin Irvin, who said, wondering how they did shots of the interior looking out the pictures above the radio. Well, they would have taken the wall out, and they would have just had the camera over there. So were they actual pictures? They were, but they just weren't there when we were, theoretically shooting through them. And then on the radio, was it actually a radio that worked, or did they have a tape player in there that played the events that you recorded to hear? I don't know if that radio really worked or not, because it was never actually playing. It was, they might plug it in if you saw a light, so they could plug it in and you would see the light, but anything we were listening to, again, was some sort of archival footage of a radio show. And so they would play that. And similar to what I said about the music, where if there was dialogue, we wouldn't hear anything. We'd just sort of be looking towards the radio and pretending, and the director might give certain cues like, okay, laugh, or we might just, if we knew it was a comedy or if we knew it was a serious speech, then we'd listen intently. We'd heard what it was, so we had, in some cases, a sense of what we were listening to, and other times it was something that was going to be put in later. So they might just have us give various different reactions, and then they would edit according to what fit at the moment. So if we heard that sound, it was someplace else. It wasn't really coming from the radio, and they would fix that in sound edit so that the sound appeared to be coming from the right place. This question is from Holly Valea, who wanted to know, on the series, did you ever want to cut your hair short and been told no? How did the producers handle real lifestyle change requests from the stars? Oh, well, we've talked a little bit about the hair thing, and how it wasn't period correct a lot of the time, particularly with the girls, particularly in later seasons. Actually, I don't recall ever asking permission to do anything with my hair, but I never particularly wanted to cut it short, but I did feather it in the 80s or in the late 70s, which was so not period, but I guess I just figured they'd deal with it. And I remember for the homecoming, they had asked if they were potentially interested in cutting my hair short, like in a bowl cut, and my agent basically said no, because she felt that it would be too restrictive for other jobs I might be auditioning for. So we were able to not do that. But otherwise, I think that may be why they changed Michael's hair originally. They had her with a red rinse and then a wig, hair pieces, and then I think she wanted to go back to her own kind of natural blonde. So those types of things, I think they just evolved in some for convenience. I know in the homecoming they had dyed my hair red and David's, but it just, it was more maintenance, so it was easier to just let the hair go natural, which is why those of us who didn't have naturally red hair just went back to whatever our natural color was, and why they didn't worry so much about one of the parents having red hair. So, it wasn't necessarily always accurate for the show, and why they didn't insist on that, I'm not sure. They were probably just trying to keep us happy, and, I was young enough and vain enough to think, but I don't want my hair to look really, unattractive. whatever. You know, as you get a little older, you go, hey, do what you need to do. This is from RG123 Red. Let's see. As actors, when you finally saw the finished show after editing, was it hard for you to not think of the actual soundstage or backlot where everything was filmed? Were you able to enjoy the final show? I think watching the final episode had more to do with, could I not be distracted by watching myself? Because I would tend to watch my performance and different aspects of that and be distracted by that at times, like how I looked, or did I like my acting choice? Did I find it believable? Things like that. So those were more distracting to me sometimes the first time I watched it than other things. Yeah, I mean, I was always aware of, you know, that it was sets and things like that, but I could still just get engaged in the story and enjoy the story. So I think I always watch it with a little of both. I'm looking and aware of what went on when we shot to some degree, and certainly the stages, even when I don't remember the actual shooting of it, but I can also just enjoy it. That's what I have for you for this segment of Ask Judy. I will be back with more behind the scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. And if you have a question, do put it in the comments someplace below, because I do read all the comments. Thanks for watching.